This wasn't supposed to happen. The MVP got her trophy, the Aces had their parade ready, and Indiana was just filler. But what unfolded wasn't a celebration, it was an exposure. And it might just be the most embarrassing playoff collapse we've seen in years. Las Vegas was buzzing long before tip-off. The air inside Michelob Ultra Arena carried the weight of celebration, confidence, and inevitability. The Aces were not just playing basketball, they were parading dominance. A'ja Wilson, draped in the glow of her second MVP trophy, stood as the centerpiece of the night. Her smile carried the message, "This is our league, our moment, our dynasty." The crowd roared with MVP chants, confident that their queen would punctuate the occasion with a statement win. This wasn't just a playoff opener, it was supposed to be a coronation. Vegas swaggered into the arena with the aura of untouchables. They were the defending champion, stacked with all-stars, and riding the kind of home-court invincibility that had broken opponents before the ball was even tipped. To the average fan, Indiana wasn't even supposed to matter. But on the other sideline, the Indiana Fever were living a different reality. Written off, bruised by injuries, and dismissed by most of the national media, they arrived as the ultimate underdogs. Aaliyah Boston was carrying a heavier load without key depth pieces, like Lexi Hull at full strength. The whispers around the league were cruel. Indiana should just be happy to be here. Sixth seed, limping into the playoffs, facing the defending champions on their turf. It had all the makings of a sweep. The numbers only amplified the imbalance. Historically, sixth seeds in the WNBA have won just 9% of their first-round playoff series. Since the league expanded the postseason in 2016, no sixth seed had gone on to knock off a reigning champion. Statistically, Indiana was supposed to be a footnote, a warm-up act for Vegas's quest to cement their dynasty with a three-peat. Yet, there was something in the air, something offbeat, because for all of Vegas's dominance, cracks had shown late in the season. Their defense, once suffocating, ranked only 5th in defensive rating post-All-Star break. Their bench, shallow and streaky, had been exposed more than once when stars went cold. Meanwhile, Indiana was carrying a chip the size of the Midwest. They weren't just here to play basketball, they were here to fight for respect. The Fever entered with the lowest expectations, but also the least pressure. For a team with nothing to lose, every possession was fuel, every slight was gasoline. And make no mistake, the slights had piled up. National coverage barely mentioned their chances. Analysts laughed off their grit. Even the pre-game coverage painted them as pawns in Vegas's grander story. A'ja Wilson's MVP night. But sports has a cruel sense of humor. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall. The same arena that glowed with MVP chants would soon echo with gasps. The same trophy that symbolized dominance would soon stand as irony. And the same underdog that nobody believed in, the Indiana Fever, would transform into the hunters, not the hunted. This was more than a playoff opener. This was a collision between arrogance and resilience, between the assumed and the unthinkable. And as history has always shown us in the WNBA, from Houston's collapse in 2000 to Phoenix's miracle runs, sometimes the script doesn't just flip, it burns. From the opening tip, it was clear this wasn't going to be the coronation Las Vegas had scripted. The first quarter carried the tension of two worlds colliding, Vegas with its arrogance, Indiana with its grit. A'ja Wilson, fresh off hoisting her MVP trophy, tried to set the tone early. She attacked the paint on the Fever's first defensive switch, but instead of a smooth finish, she was swarmed. Aaliyah Boston bumped her body to body, Natasha Howard cut off the driving lane, and Odyssey Sims poked at the ball with relentless hands. Wilson forced up a contested hook, bricked it, and stared at the official for a whistle that never came. That moment foreshadowed the unraveling of Vegas's night. The Aces leaned into intimidation. Chelsea Gray shoved off on drives. Jackie Young extended her arms to create space. The crowd tried to rattle Indiana with deafening noise after every foul call. But here's the twist. Indiana didn't flinch. They absorbed the hits, absorbed the arrogance, and turned it into fuel. The whistles, or lack thereof, set an immediate tone. Vegas expected calls to go their way, as they often had. Yet, the officials allowed physicality to dictate play, and that played directly into Indiana's hands. By the 6-minute mark, Wilson was already showing frustration, jawing with Boston after another missed layup. You could feel the balance of power shifting, not on the scoreboard yet, but in energy, in control. Let's talk numbers. The Fever shot 48% from the field in the opening quarter, compared to Vegas's 38%. Indiana had 4 steals in the first 12 minutes alone, a stat that screamed effort and anticipation. Vegas, meanwhile, coughed the ball up 5 times, careless passes reflecting overconfidence. The Aces pushed the pace, trying to run Indiana out of the gym, but the Fever matched them stride for stride, forcing the tempo into chaotic scrambles rather than clean, fast breaks. And then came the first shockwave, Kelsey Mitchell. With 3:12 left in the first quarter, Mitchell pulled up from deep over Gray. Swish. 30 seconds later, she sliced through 2 defenders, kissed it off the glass, and screamed in celebration as the Fever bench leapt to their feet. The swagger that Vegas had carried in, the championship aura, was suddenly being mimicked, flipped, and shoved back in their faces by Indiana's star guard. Vegas responded with arrogance, not adjustment. They hunted fouls instead of hunting baskets. Wilson threw her arms wide on a missed jumper, begging for a call. Young lowered her shoulder and got whistled for a charge. The body language said it all. The Aces weren't locked in. They were insulted that Indiana dared to challenge them. But Indiana wasn't just challenging, they were controlling. By the end of the quarter, the Fever led 26-21, and that 5-point margin carried the weight of history. Teams that steal early momentum in playoff Game 1s often flip series narratives. Historically, road teams that win the first quarter in WNBA playoff matchups go on to win the game 63% of the time. The Fever had planted their flag. The first quarter wasn't just about points, it was about psychology. Indiana proved they wouldn't bow to the MVP, wouldn't shrink under the banners, wouldn't crumble under the lights. Vegas expected fear. What they got instead was defiance. And in that defiance, you could feel the first tremors of an upset. This was no coronation. This was a war, and Indiana had just fired the first shot. If the first quarter belonged to grit, the rest of the night belonged to one woman, Kelsey Mitchell. The numbers tell one story, but the way she dismantled Las Vegas told another. Mitchell didn't just score 34 points, she carved her name into WNBA playoff history. She didn't just silence the Aces' defense, she humiliated it. Let's break it down. Mitchell shot 11 of 19 from the field. That's nearly 58% efficiency against the defending champs on their own floor. From three-point range, 5 of 8. At the free throw line, a perfect 7 for 7. Every time Vegas thought they had her cornered, she slipped away like smoke. Every time they thought the momentum had swung back in their favor, Mitchell ripped it right out of their hands with another dagger. What makes this performance legendary isn't just the volume, it's the context. No Indiana Fever player had ever scored 30-plus points in a playoff win since Tamika Catchings in her prime. In fact, only a handful of players in WNBA history have dropped 34 or more in a road playoff game. Mitchell wasn't supposed to be that player. Not against this defense, not on this night. But that's the beauty of underdogs. They don't care about what's supposed to happen. Vegas threw everything at her. Chelsea Gray pressed up tight, using her physical frame to body Mitchell. Jackie Young tried to cut off her lanes with size. Even Kaya Stokes was switched onto her after screens. It didn't matter. Mitchell used her speed, her crossover, her hesitation dribble to create just enough daylight. And when she saw daylight, she punished it. At one point in the second quarter, Mitchell nailed back-to-back threes over Gray, forcing Becky Hammon to burn a timeout. The camera caught Hammon shaking her head, furious that her guards couldn't contain one player. The crowd, which had spent the night chanting MVP for Wilson, suddenly went quiet, stunned by Mitchell's audacity. But here's the dagger stat. While Mitchell poured in 34 points, Vegas's entire backcourt, Gray and Young combined, managed just 27 points on 9 of 27 shooting. That's less than 34% efficiency. Mitchell didn't just outperform them, she embarrassed them. On a night where Vegas's stars were supposed to shine, they were dimmed by one relentless scorer from Indiana. Mitchell's masterpiece was more than just shots falling. It was about leadership. Every bucket lifted her teammates. Every celebration sparked energy on the bench. When she hit a contested step-back jumper late in the third, Aaliyah Boston clapped her hands so hard the sound echoed louder than the crowd. Odyssey Sims, bouncing on the sideline, shouted, "Keep killing 'em, Kels!" The Fever weren't just watching. They were believing. The psychological effect was devastating. Vegas prided itself on breaking opponents mentally, suffocating them until they folded. But Mitchell flipped the script. With every bucket, the Aces grew tighter, their body language worse. A'ja Wilson yelled at refs. Gray barked at teammates, and Hammond paced furiously. Mitchell had reduced the league's most composed powerhouse into a team scrambling for answers. And maybe the most symbolic moment came with just under 4 minutes left in the game. Mitchell crossed up Gray, pulled back, and drilled a three so pure it felt like a knife. As the net snapped, she turned to the Vegas bench, stone-faced, no smile, just a cold stare. That wasn't celebration. That was a statement. We're not afraid of you anymore. When the buzzer finally sounded, Mitchell's 34 points weren't just numbers on a stat sheet. They were the heartbeat of an upset, the anthem of a team that refused to bow. This was her masterpiece, her signature moment. On A'ja Wilson's MVP night, the true MVP of the floor wore Indiana Fever colors. For 2 seasons, the Las Vegas Aces built a reputation of invincibility. They won games by intimidation, by sheer star power, by making opponents crumble before the fourth quarter even arrived. But on this night, the mask slipped, and it slipped hard. It started with A'ja Wilson. The reigning MVP, fresh off a trophy ceremony, looked like she was ready to put Indiana in her personal highlight reel. But instead, she put up one of the worst playoff shooting nights of her career. 6 of 22 from the floor. That's just 27% shooting. For a player who normally lives above 50% efficiency, this wasn't just an off night, it was a meltdown, and it wasn't random. Indiana's defensive scheme was ruthless. Aaliyah Boston bodied her on every touch, forcing Wilson further from her sweet spots. Natasha Howard slid over to double whenever Wilson tried to spin baseline. The Fever dared her to beat them with mid-range jumpers, and she couldn't. On Wilson's 22 shots, only 2 came uncontested. Roll the tape, and you'll see a pattern. Fadeaways off balance, forced hooks into traffic, elbows flailing for space. That wasn't dominance, that was desperation. But the unraveling wasn't just about missed shots. It was about behavior. Wilson, usually stoic, started flopping. On one possession, she collapsed to the ground after barely being touched by Boston, throwing her arms in frustration when no whistle came. On another, she swung an elbow at Howard fighting for a rebound, drawing a chorus of boos from the Fever bench. This wasn't the calm MVP. It was a player losing control. The Aces followed her lead. Their offense collapsed into hero ball, their spacing disappeared, and their confidence drained possession by possession. Vegas shot just 23% from three-point range, 5 of 22, with multiple wide-open looks clanging off the rim. Indiana closed out hard, and suddenly, the greatest shooting backcourt of Gray and Young looked hesitant. Rebounding? Forget it. The Fever out-rebounded Vegas 41-32, including 11 offensive boards. Natasha Howard and Brianna Turner treated the paint like sacred ground, ripping down contested rebounds while Vegas players looked around for whistles instead of fighting. By the fourth quarter, every 50-50 ball belonged to Indiana. And turnovers, another crack in the armor. Vegas gave it away 14 times, many of them careless. One sequence in the third quarter summed it all up. Jackie Young tried to thread a flashy no-look pass on the break. It sailed out of bounds, and she threw her hands up in frustration. Becky Hammon exploded on the sideline, screaming for composure. But composure never came. By the final minutes, the arrogance had fully curdled into panic. Wilson begged for calls. Gray barked at teammates. Hammond looked like a coach staring at a team she didn't recognize. And the crowd? Silent. The same arena that roared with MVP chants at tip-off now sat in stunned disbelief. Statistically, the unraveling was brutal. Wilson, 6 for 22, 27%. Only 8 rebounds, despite 35 minutes of play. Vegas team FG%, 39%, nearly 10 points below their season average. Offensive rebounds allowed, 11. Their worst mark in over a month. Fast break points, just 6. Proof that Indiana killed their transition game. This wasn't just a loss, it was a dismantling. The champions looked human. No, worse, they looked rattled. And if you looked into A'ja Wilson's eyes in those final possessions, you didn't see MVP swagger. You saw doubt. You saw cracks. On a night meant to immortalize their dominance, the Aces instead showed their fragility. And Indiana, the supposed punching bag, exposed every weakness for the world to see. Kelsey Mitchell may have lit the fire, but she didn't keep it burning alone. Playoff basketball is never won by one star. It's won when role players rise above expectation. And on this night, Indiana's supporting cast wrote their own chapters in the upset story. Let's start with Odyssey Sims. At 32, she was supposed to be a veteran voice, not a difference maker. But when the Aces pressed Mitchell with double teams, Sims stepped forward without hesitation. She attacked the rim fearlessly, slicing through traffic and drawing fouls. Her 14 points on 6 of 10 shooting were efficient, but it was her defense that left fingerprints on the game. On multiple possessions, Sims smothered Chelsea Gray, poking the ball loose, forcing rushed passes. Late in the second quarter, she even ripped the ball clean out of Jackie Young's hands, a moment that sent the Fever bench into a frenzy. Then there was Aaliyah Boston, the reigning Rookie of the Year turned sophomore force. This was billed as MVP versus MVP, and Boston didn't blink. She put up a 12-point, 13-rebound double-double, anchoring the paint with a presence far beyond her years. While Wilson flailed for fouls, Boston stayed grounded, disciplined, and relentless. Her box-outs freed Howard and Turner to crash the boards, and her interior defense forced Wilson into shot after shot of frustration. Every time Wilson looked up, Boston was there, arms wide, chest squared. Lexi Hull may not stuff a box score, but her impact was undeniable. Tasked with defending Jackie Young, one of the league's most efficient scorers, Hull turned the matchup into a slog. Young finished with just 12 points on 4 of 13 shooting, and Hull's fingerprints were all over that stat line. She hounded Young off screens, fought through contact, and contested every jumper. In playoff basketball, there's no stat for frustration caused, but if there was, Hull would have led both teams. Inside, Natasha Howard and Brianna Turner owned the glass. Howard, the veteran forward with championship pedigree, snatched 10 rebounds, including 3 on the offensive end that extended critical possession. Turner, often overlooked, added 8 rebounds and a pair of blocked shots that electrified her teammates. Together, they neutralized Vegas's interior strength. One possession in the third quarter summed it up. Wilson rose for a mid-range jumper, Howard contested, Turner boxed out Stokes, and the Fever secured the rebound. That's teamwork. That's grit. Every underdog story needs its supporting heroes, and Indiana had them all. Sims, Boston, Hull, Howard, Turner. They didn't just play roles, they stole scenes. While Vegas's stars grew smaller under the lights, Indiana's role players grew bigger. Each rebound, each deflection, each hustle play added bricks to the upset wall. In playoff history, the names of role players often fade. But nights like this remind us that upsets aren't just about the star. They're about the collective will of a team refusing to fold. And in Las Vegas, Indiana's supporting cast proved that belief isn't measured in stat sheets alone. It's measured in heart. What happened in Las Vegas wasn't just a win, it was a rewriting of the WNBA script. On the very night A'ja Wilson lifted her MVP trophy, the Indiana Fever lifted her mask. Injuries, dismissive media, 6th seed odds stacked against them, none of it mattered. They stormed into the champion's house and left it silent. History tells us the truth. 72% of teams that take Game 1 win the series. And rarely do champions drop their opener at home. Yet Vegas, the so-called dynasty, looked fragile. Their arrogance cracked under the weight of Indiana's grit. Mitchell's 34, Boston's poise, Sims's fire. They weren't just stats, they were symbols. The fallout was instant. Becky Hammon dismissed it as just one game. But the eyes of the league told another story. Social media lit up. Vegas fans in shock. Fever fans screaming belief. The Invincible Aces? Exposed. Vulnerable. Human. Game 2 now carries pressure the Aces never wanted. If Indiana steals it, the dynasty narrative collapses, and a new guard rises. So let's be clear. This wasn't just an upset. It was a warning shot. And Vegas better be listening. If you felt that fire, don't forget, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more breakdown.